Now we know that the UK is a hive of innovation for life sciences. So what does MedCity do, and how can it encourage that and get us great progress?
MedCity is an organisation that's been set up as a partnership between the Mayor of London and the Greater London Authority, which is the government for London, and the academic and health science centres of London and the Greater South East, particularly with a focus on London, Oxford and Cambridge. And what we're trying to do is drive economic growth through growth in life sciences. And we are delivering a range of services, a range of programs and projects, all of which are aimed at trying to support growth in the sector, and particularly to try and encourage industry and academia and the NHS to work together in order to drive activity across the sector.
That's great. I mean, could you give me an idea of the scale of the life sciences sector in this area? I mean, the amount of jobs, the amount of money that is generated, and the importance that it holds to the British economy.
Yeah, it's a really significant part of the UK economy, actually. There are a large number of companies across the southeast, several hundred companies which range from very small companies through to very large multinationals. And of course, people will probably be aware of GSK and AstraZeneca, which are two of the leading multinational pharmaceutical companies, both of which are based in the UK, headquartered in the UK. So as far as London is concerned, there are around 300 companies acting in the life sciences space, and this is everything from what we call digital health companies through to pharmaceutical companies, and they are employing close to 30,000 people across the UK, just the ones that are based in London. But then if you look around the rest of the UK, you've got significant clusters of activity, particularly around Oxford and Cambridge, Manchester, Edinburgh as well. So scattered throughout the UK. So it's a really, really significant sector for the UK economy, and it is a big employer of staff and a net contributor to the economy. If you then look at the healthcare service, which obviously extends into the NHS, I mean, you will know, all of us, that what a major employer the NHS is, and so that interplay between the sector and the healthcare service is a really important part of the economic mix.
So we are facing, as a nation, as a society, huge problems with an ageing population, more comorbidities, bigger strain virtually by the year. It keeps on going up. How important is it that we get life sciences right to tackle the problems that are facing us?
It's incredibly important. The sector is generating a range of new products and services which move towards addressing all of these challenges that you've set out that we face as a society and an economy. There's a whole range of activities going on. So when we talk about life sciences, it really encompasses a very broad set of activities. It's everything from therapeutic production, so which is the production of new drugs. And interesting, those drugs now can be cells. They could be manipulated and manufactured cells, as well as more traditional pharmaceutical products, which are based on chemistry. But then it ranges all the way through into new diagnostics, which can really work alongside the genetic information of patients to understand what drugs are going to work for those patients, all the way through to the way in which digital technologies can support management of patients for instance, in their own home, or manage them remotely so that they don't need to come into hospital, they don't need to come for outpatient appointments. So opportunities to try and keep patients out of A&E, for example. So there's enormous opportunity, but the challenge is getting these products and services to the market. And of course, I think one of the things that we recognise that with the challenges of an aging population, with increased comorbidity, and one of the challenges is how you ensure that the supply of healthcare can meet that demand. And that's why a really important part of the mix is how healthcare can be transformed so it's delivered in a more efficient and effective way.
That certainly is the big challenge, isn't it? Society, we've got to change. We need an accent on prevention, not the old-fashioned standard model of treatment. How do you think MedCity can really help in changing the way the NHS adopts technology? There is this problem with navigating the NHS, it's so big. We talked about that. How can you help with the small companies, but also with the bigger companies, get to the right people to deal with, and then get their products and services to the people that really need it, the patients and the public?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a big challenge, and one of the things that we do is to help companies. We do this in a number of ways. Quite simply, we help to explain the NHS to companies. We often can think about the NHS as one organisation, but in reality, it's lots and lots of different business units, effectively, that are making their own decisions, that make their own procurement decisions, make their own choices about the kind of care that they deliver. And often small companies don't really understand that. They think if they can get access to the NHS, then that opens up the whole marketplace. So we help to provide signposting, but also to explain that. A really important part of this mix of dealing with the opportunities for digital technology to transform healthcare is through a programme that we've developed in partnership with a set of organisations called Academic Health Science Networks, of which there are 3 in London. And we're working together with those 3 organisations to deliver a programme called digitalhealth.london. And through that, we have selected a group of just over 30 companies that we are supporting in a very targeted way to help them develop their products in the NHS setting and really use the expertise and the resources that are available within the NHS to help them move their products forward. But that is obviously a relatively small set of companies. So what we also do around that is we provide a lot of advice and guidance to other companies that are not on this accelerator programme. And in addition to that, we are doing quite a lot of work to try and look at how companies make sure they're doing the right sorts of things at the right time. So a big issue is around safety and efficacy and technology standards for digital products. So if we have a drug that is prescribed by a doctor, we expect it to have gone through a rigorous set of testing to ensure that it's safe and that we understand the efficacy and we understand the side effects. How do you do that for an app, for example? How do you ensure that an app that might be assessing blood pressure, for example, is actually using the right evidence, the right research-based evidence in order to ensure that what it's reading is correct?
That's great. I mean, it shows a great deal of positivity and a great deal of impetus going forward. The one real burning topic here is obviously Brexit, how that affects the whole nation, but how it also affects life sciences. I mean, you're pushing innovation, you're getting things going forward, but this is a bit of a brick wall, isn't it?
the outcome of the vote wasn't what the sector had hoped for. The status of EU workers within the sector is a key issue. Significant concerns at the moment around loss of funding into the academic base. There are some academic institutions which rely very heavily on funding from European sources. At the moment, everything continues as normal until we actually get to the point where the exit is being negotiated. But there are programmes through the European Research Council, through programmes such as Horizon 2020 and regional development funding, which has been quite important to some of the infrastructure that's important to the health system and the innovation system, all of which we will be keen to see supported, those issues supported moving forward. In terms of opportunities, there are certainly some opportunities. There are, as you would expect with the life sciences, a whole set of regulations that sit around and support the sector. And with Brexit, there's an opportunity to ensure that the regulatory framework is really working to support the competitiveness of the sector. So, for example, I've already mentioned the fact that from a therapeutic perspective, there's an increasing use of cell therapies, that manipulate genes. And moving forward, we have an opportunity to ensure that the regulatory framework that we put in place is really fit to support the development of these types of areas of innovation. And another area that's really important to the UK is the regulation around clinical trials. So there's some issues that could work to our advantage. There are some issues where we need to make sure that we don't lose the connectivity that we have to Europe with regard to clinical trials. But things that we can do to look to remove some of the bureaucracy perhaps that sits around the way that clinical trials are set up, and the speed of setting trials up would be a positive to the UK. So I think that there are lots of things that need to be looked at. And of course, what we have to remember is that the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry is a global industry. So while Europe and free trade in Europe is incredibly important to the sector, we mustn't forget also that all markets around the world are critical for companies that are developing products and services in life sciences and healthcare. So that will continue to be an important part of what everybody's thinking about.
That is absolutely true. It is a global market, but we are on a bit of borrowed time here. We've got maybe 2 years until the full impact of Brexit. But you mentioned funds there, the European Union Regional Development Fund, Horizon 2020. An awful lot of money that benefits life sciences here. Those funds are effectively frozen. We won't be able to get into them, and they are the lifeblood of these new enterprises.
Yeah, it's not true to say that they are frozen at the moment. At present, those funds continue to be available to UK companies, organisations, to researchers. We ourselves have just engaging on a number of projects that have ERDF funding, and all of those are going ahead. None of those projects had been signed off prior to the Brexit vote. So these are all projects that have been finalised since the 23rd of June. And we therefore continue with those. With Horizon 2020, again, Horizon 2020 is a European programme, but it's open to a wider set of participants than just members of the European Union. So there are opportunities for us to continue to participate in these funding platforms, maybe in a slightly different capacity. But I don't think it's the case that the door is automatically closed to those. Nevertheless, I would agree with you. It's important that we make sure that we get it right. I think you will probably be aware that the UK has been a net uh, beneficiary of funding for innovation from Europe. And from the sector's perspective, it's really important that as we move forward with the negotiations, and indeed as the government develops its position on industrial strategy, that some of those important pieces of funding infrastructure are considered and are reflected in the deal as we move forward.
It's great news, great to hear that they've still got those tentacles that we can go into those things. But also, we've got change. There's lots of change here. I mean, George Freeman's gone as Life Sciences Minister, replaced by two people. More change, more uncertainty. What is the mood out there? Are people really concerned that we haven't got a handle on it, that it needs some, maybe do we need more government statements about life sciences and the future? Or do you think we're going in the right direction?
I think that the point about the ministers is really interesting, actually, because I know a lot of people have said to me, well, we don't have a life sciences minister anymore. Does that mean that there isn't the same level of government commitment to the sector as there was previously? And actually, I've spoken to George Freeman about this myself. In fact, we've got 4 ministers now who are focused on life sciences. Nicola Blackwood and Lord Pryor in the Department of Health. And also Greg Hans focusing on trade, and Joe Johnson focusing on science and innovation. So in a sense, the sector is well served because all of those ministers have a focus on life sciences. And if we look back a couple of years ago, there wasn't previously a life sciences minister. That was the situation when, in fact, there was only one minister that was responsible for life sciences, along with a whole set of other things. So I think the fact that we've very explicitly got a number of ministers across different departments that have got this as part of their portfolio shows that government does still recognise the importance of the sector. And of course, George Freeman is in a strong and influential position to influence the Prime Minister's policy agenda moving forward. And we know that he continues to be an advocate for the sector, even if he hasn't got a portfolio that is dedicated to life sciences. So I think the signals are good. I don't think we should be complacent. There's been a lot of engagement between government, between the Department of Health and the Department for Business, and around life sciences post-Brexit. The sector has made its voice heard very loudly with government. There's a great deal of interest in terms of what industrial strategy means. We have a Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. What does industrial strategy look like, and how does that work for life sciences? Certainly within the sector, the view is that life sciences needs to be a prominent part of that, reflecting the importance of the sector to the economy. So I think that there are questions, certainly. There is there is a great deal of hunger for reassurance and for signals that things will continue in the right direction, and that the sector will be seen as a very significant part of the government's policy and industrial strategy. But at the moment, the signals, I think, certainly seem to be positive, but time will tell, of course.
Well, that is great. Again, great positivity there. Do we have a situation here where life sciences actually may be even able to lead the economy in the right direction, actually set an example? Because I think, as we've spoken about, the amount of innovation that you've got happening, you know, the sheer talent, the creative talent, the ability to get things going is simply amazing. And if you get that all going in the right direction, if we get success after success, maybe it can lift some of the gloom that is currently around over Brexit?
Would be great, wouldn't it? And it is important, of course. I think one of the things that the sector is really recognised for is the level of innovation, and I think also from a Brexit perspective, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the innovation system that we have in the UK, which is really driven out of the universities and the quality of the research, of the science, and of the innovation that is taking place within those institutions, is absolutely critical. So everything that we have within life sciences is really founded on that very strong academic base, and we've no reason to believe that should change. I think one of the things that is really important in terms of the role that the sector can play with regard to the mood music, if you like, within the nation and the economy, is the fact that there is such an enormous amount of investment that's taking place into research and development and to innovation. And of course, that's a key driver of economic activity. It's a key driver of productivity. And I think that there is a role for the sector to role model the fact that investment into innovation is absolutely critical in terms of driving the economy forward. Of course, within the sector, the thing that is really noticed is when new products come to patients, when there are new therapeutics that are really making a difference to patient populations that have been poorly or underserved previously. And as we've talked about already, there are some enormous challenges within the health system and within health. So I think that it's really important that as a sector we're talking about where the immune system is being marshalled to fight cancer, where there are fantastic opportunities around the way that we can now work with genes and hopefully use that as an arsenal against disease, and really importantly where that we continue to invest and seem to be investing into diseases which in the future are going to have a very significant impact on all of us, particularly I would point to dementia.
That's obviously a massive burden now and is going to get bigger in the future. What I'd like to turn to now is that maybe we have people involved in startups who are tuning in. What advice would you give them? What sort of collaborative practical help can MedCity provide them?
Well, my experience obviously is in the life sciences sector, but I think there are, of course, some very important things that entrepreneurs should be thinking about, and those that are thinking about formulating companies should be thinking about. It's really important to understand the demand for your product. If we look particularly in digital technologies that are trying to apply themselves into the healthcare setting, it's really critical that from the start that entrepreneurs understand their market, understand what patients and what clinicians are looking for, and that they don't come presenting solutions in search of a problem. So there are a whole set of challenges around transformation of healthcare and how healthcare is delivered, which are ripe for technology to disrupt and to change. And so in really investing in understanding what the demand is and what the market looks like is absolutely critical. Important, of course, to think about what your business model is, what your cost recovery and profit model is going to look like. So again, who is your customer? Are you trying to target consumers? So are you trying to develop something that might be delivered via the App Store, which consumers can choose whether they want to use, or is this something that will actually go through a clinician as a gatekeeper? And really important is thinking about the story you're telling about what your company is and what they're trying to do. We do quite a lot of work around the investment environment, and we part of our work at various points is about working with companies to help them hone their pitches to investors. And it's really, really important that you get your story across and that you make an impact really early on. It's like any interview situation. You've got a couple of minutes to make a good impression, and that story that you're telling about what your product or service is going to do and how it's going to really make a difference is critical.
Are there any particular collaborations or companies that you work with that really shine through? Ones that get their message across about getting it right, navigating the NHS and pitching the products as well, and making sure that they're in the right landscape?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly a number of companies that I can think of who I think are doing it really well. I'm not sure whether I should name them without having checked in with them before to make sure they're okay with that. But I think the ones who are, as I said, are really understanding the marketplace and are really thinking about the evidence base for their product and what it's going to add to what already exists. So, of course, a really important thing for any company operating in the healthcare and life sciences space is around what we call the health economic arguments for the product. So really understanding who is going to incur the cost, but what the benefits are and how those can be calculated is absolutely critical. And being able to articulate that in a very clear way, backed up with evidence, is really important.
So the clear message from me, talking to you today, Sarah, is that Brexit will not stifle life sciences in the UK, London and the South East. We have challenges and problems, yes, but that's part of everyday life, economics and politics. But I think there's also a key message here that there's practical help out there for companies who are maybe on the first steps of the journey or even established. There is help out there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's a huge amount of help available, and obviously an organisation like MedCity is focused in the southeast of England, but there are lots of other organisations that are spread throughout the UK that are there to help in other geographies, and a huge amount of infrastructure that's in place. Some of which provided by national government, some of which provided through private organisations, and a fantastic ecosystem of professional services advisors that sits around the sector and is there. But there's a lot that you can actually access free of charge, and a lot of advice that you can get early on. And of course, I would encourage companies to do so, to find that. Our website, for example, provides quite a lot of information and signposting before you even need to speak to somebody. And similarly, the digitalhealth.london site, which is the site for the programme that I talked about earlier, that is really focused on digital health, similarly does quite a lot of signposting and provision of information, and over time that body of advice and guidance will grow.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed for joining us today and sharing this. It really is positive stuff, and I think there's a real optimism from what you've told me today. Of course, the best thing to do is get in touch with MedCity and the other bodies that Sarah mentioned if you want that sort of practical help to drive your company forward. But thank you very much indeed for everyone who joined us today. I hope you found it useful and helpful. And I certainly enjoyed finding out about what MedCity and what it's doing and where we're going with life sciences, which of course is critically important to all.